Dr. Kamel Hothi, thank you very much for joining us here for the Happy Smart City podcast. It's an absolute honor and an absolute pleasure. Typically I would give an introduction of the guest. But I think in your case, again, I had another look at your illustrious career. And I would like you to give us a bit of background before we get into, the questions themselves. But an absolute honor. I mean, by far one of the most accomplished leaders that I know. So I'd just like to put that out there. And it's really gratifying that you would consider to join us here. I know it's been a long time that we've been preparing for this, but this is certainly a very, very happy day for me. So thank you for joining us.
Here, I'm so humbled by those words, and so thank you so much for those very gracious opening. For me, individuals like you who are trying to help others by sharing insight, by inviting people to collaborate and give their insight. I really admire you. So thank you so much for, inviting me. It's the other way around. Truly, it is the other way around. And I'm very humbled to be here today. So you asked me to give you a bit of a background on myself. So I'm a banker by profession here in the UK, been in the banking world for about 38 years. My career started very much as a cashier, went on to become the first ever Asian bank manager here in the UK back in the 80s. And from there, this was a time of where, we talk about diversity and inclusion at the moment, but that was a real poor understanding at that time. But so I was struggling in convincing my customers to trust me when they were quite shocked when they asked for the bank manager and saw this Asian female come out. But my curiosity turned into resilience, and I would say I was really determined to win my customers over. And from there, I went on to lead the retail market in banking. And then, like every company, as it grows, we had a few curveballs, and one of them was an acquisition when two banks came together. And then once again, I was really quite curious of how I could help support. We were having a huge challenge with two different cultures coming together, different computer systems, different thoughts, different products. And we slightly took our eye off the ball. That resulted in complaints going through the roof. So against that, once curiosity started chipping away, and I started bringing people together to collaborate. And I'm a great believer in collaboration, and I don't believe I have the answers. And started an initiative called Working Together Smarter to really help the two banks come together. From there, I was asked to take that initiative right across the organization. So I jumped across into operations, really enjoyed it, but that's where, as I was getting more senior, so the lack of diversity in the banking world, and being a woman, was facing a lot of what we can now call microaggressions. And once again, that curiosity kicked in, and wanting to win these execs over, why my voice wasn't being heard, why my ideas were being stolen. So we founded the first ever ethnic minority network and women's network across the banking industry, really to understand, rather than pointing fingers at the organization, but with myself, what was stopping me. And when I did a talk, there was somebody there from the government who asked me to, look, we're pitching for the Olympic Games in 2012. We need to improve our supplier diversity and procurement. Could you lead the task force for us? It was a voluntary role, which I took on board. And 18 months later, one of the white papers across government that really shaped the way they procured contracts and became the bedrock of the Olympic Games bid. And I'm proud to say that obviously London won that bid. And my bank then built the platform to allow small businesses to really participate in the games. And what that did for me and to her was it really boosted my confidence. I felt I had so much more to give. I married an entrepreneur who's always saying access to finance was difficult, and my bank was very British. We didn't have the products, and we didn't really know how to communicate to them. So again, I did my research and presented it. I had an opportunity to present it to the CEO, and they loved the idea. They asked me to second and start developing it, with the risk I might lose my job because they couldn't backfill it. But when, like you, I found my purpose, and that really boosted my confidence, and I took on that risk. developed my own cultural training courses, developed new products, pooled all the marketing budgets, designed these wonderful award ceremonies to recognize the contribution that the community was making, as well as allowing my brand and my colleagues to network. I got headhunted to take it to corporate banking and globally. And within 4 years, we became leaders in the market. Everything was going fine until the 2008 banking crisis globally. And as being one of the strongest banks, we were asked to rescue another bank by the government, unfortunately, which took us down with it. And we then had to be rescued. Our share price tumbled from £10 down to 22p. 150,000 staff really resented the company. I was asked to stay on, even though a new board was appointed, to see if we could win trust with customers and pride with colleagues. And that's the first time I jumped across into what we call group corporate affairs, to start looking at, if volunteering could have done that for me, could that do that for my colleagues? So over the course of 6 years, Theo wrote a new blueprint of how to do charity partnerships and measured the impact of volunteering using skills with 3 universities, because I wanted to make it strategically viable rather than this, oh, that's a nice thing to do. And I'm proud to say over those 6 years, really did this partnership approach, managed to pay the government back, and became independent. So I retired in 2017. I now have a portfolio of roles. I'm proud to say I'm helping Her Majesty Queen here in the UK on Her Commonwealth Trust Fund. It's a foundation that was set up 3 years ago to help the Commonwealth and Her Majesty and the youth of the Commonwealth in social enterprise. So we provide grants, we provide mentoring and resources and tools. And my job is to see if an idea works well in India, could it work in Africa? So I'm really proud. So I was working with Prince Harry, but we'll see where that goes at the moment. I'm still an ambassador for Alzheimer's Society, looking at dementia and mental health, especially in the Black ethnic minority community, where, as we know, mental health is still a taboo subject. We don't even have a name for dementia, as well as a few other charities, including Mamusi, where we build schools in Kenya as a bond-style initiative. And then finally, as a non-exec on a couple of companies, including TLC Lions, where we go into corporates to help look at inclusion, well-being, and cultural leadership through storytelling. And I coach the storytellers, I coach the company execs, and as well as strategically helping the company grow. That's my career.
Well, like I said, very, very illustrious. And for people who may not know, I'm sure, our US audience may be familiar with some of the, honorary titles in the UK, but for the vast majority, of people that are on our audience may not be aware. So, I mean, again, so much, impact trying to bridge Asia and, the heart of modern finance, which is the UK, as far as systems are concerned. And so how does the OBE title come along, the Order of the British Empire?
So basically when I was asked to, when I developed the Asian strategy for the bank, when I said access to finance, I was really keen to it was a win-win, both for the community and for the bank. And my passion to help, because I could see these migrants and, we were migrants. I was born in India. My family came to the UK. We went through, we talk about Black Lives Matter around the globe, but in the 60s, my gosh, the racism in the UK was really vile. And to have gone through that and still continue trying to build your entrepreneurship here, I was really passionate about the Asian strategy. But at the same time, when we talk about diversity of thought, that's for me was the key thing, that we could build a better society. We could bring our passion and our initiatives to the table. So I've always been very wary of culture and been pushing on inclusion, and won a number of awards through that journey. But the climax came in 2017 when I wasn't aware of it. It takes about 2 years for somebody to be investigated. Was nominated for Her Majesty Queen's British Empire Award, which basically recognized my contribution to diversity cross banking. And it was a very humbling experience. You go to Buckingham Palace, you meet Her Majesty Queen, and you're given this award, and it's very surreal. And for somebody who finds talking about recognition very awkward, coming from a society where your parents always telling you never, you have to have other people talk about your achievements, not yourself. I found that really difficult. But when I walked in there to get my award, I saw my son sitting there, who are now 34 and 30, gone through my journey with me and my husband. It was truly a humbling experience, and it's something I hope I can still live up to and use that recognition to be able to inspire others.
It is so amazing. So, that's why I still feel like this is just a very humbling moment to interview you, because you didn't just live through the change. I think a lot of people have lived through some really challenging times, and for them to share stories of the past is very, liberating and very informing for younger generations to be aware of certain challenges. But you didn't just live through the changes; you were a catalyst for change, and that's just really big. So we will go into your questions for the day. I think part of the first question has been answered, but if you can just be very precise with it and very concise. So your first question is, what is your current occupation?
I have a portfolio, but I would say my occupation really is I'm an advisor, I consult, and I'm a coach. And that's contributed in a number of ways. Half of them are pro bono to charities to help really improve their governance, to help them understand how to be more commercially minded when they're pitching for funding to their corporate partners. But the other side of my fence is I'm still really passionate about culture and trying to help leadership in the corporate world to be much more mindful of the way that they lead their organizations, because I feel that the old vanguard of the way that people lead has to change. So that's where my coaching comes in.
Lovely. Now, the next one is, how does your role contribute to the economies of cities?
I'm hoping that as the world is changing so fast, whether it's tech or communication or products, the climate, everything is changing so fast. And the next generation, from my understanding, my reading of them, they're looking for companies with purpose. They're looking for leaders who are much more honest and much more capable as leaders rather than egoistic. So I feel I need for companies to survive, for companies to stay relevant, but also listen to what their customers are looking for, what their colleagues are looking for, what their people are asking for. They need to change. So if I can help leaders to show their vulnerability, to press pause for a moment, and to really understand what listening actually means, what diversity of thought actually means, and where diversity, when we say adds 30% to the bottom line, for that to happen, they have to be emotionally connected to this. So my passion is to get those leaders to really press pause, reflect, look in the mirror, and help them understand themselves better in order to help their companies to be more sustainable going forward in the future. And for being sustainable, hopefully that is adding better to the economy and giving opportunities for people, more fairness around the world as we improve our culture.
Very, very nice. And I like the fact that you, even though we're talking about economies of cities, you mentioned young people. There's this sort of new paradigm that I'm trying to sort of evolve into. And it's moving away from looking at the world in two ways. So the first way was, you want to leave behind a better world than you found. That was kind of like the virtuous leader of the recent past. But I saw this really interesting perspective that really was a game changer for me. And I'm sure you've probably seen this as well, that we've borrowed the world from future generations, right? So we're indebted to future generations because they've lended us the planet. It's not ours. It belongs to future generations. And I think that to me is a fundamental shift, especially because things are so fast paced. We really need to be in a position where we humble ourselves as opposed to, just procrastinating and understanding that we need real change and really quickly. The world doesn't belong to us. Now, the second point is, so there's the issue of looking at the world as writing a book. You know how people say, your life is your book. How do you choose to write each page? For each day that you live is a page in your book. I'm trying to think of things differently now because the world is so fast paced, and we really need to take a hard look at ourselves and make decisions as opposed to, again, procrastinating. So if you're really making hard decisions, then you need to look at your life, at least as far as I'm concerned, as writing a letter. As opposed to writing a book, now you're writing a letter. It's got to be short and very concise. What do you know for sure? And what message would you like to leave behind in this fast-paced world when we need to make some really serious decisions? So those are just my perspectives on, on leadership and the future for different communities around the world. The next question is, so how can racial diversity add competitive value to executive boards of multinational corporations and local government treasuries?
Theo, that's something that's really, really close to heart. Just commenting on your perspective, I think that's a really forward-thinking, mature way of, I've got grandchildren, and I'm one side of me, it keeps me up at night, worried about what the future is, what the world would look like for them. And you're absolutely right. Have we borrowed? Have we taken too much? Have we been too greedy? Whether it be sustainability, whether it be, raping this Mother Earth and not paying back enough. So I think it's a great way to saying, how do we pay forward in everything we do? So going back to your question about, diversity and diversity of thought and board, how many reports have been written by McKinsey's, Deloitte's, Forbes, constantly measuring and coming up with the same sort of outcomes that, if you have diverse thoughts around that table, you add 30% to the bottom line. But I don't feel personally, I get frustrated that people understand what that actually means. And for me is actually, if a company, you sell products and you want to stay relevant and you want to stay forward thinking, you want to stay ahead of the game, but the world is moving so fast around you. And then you're asking those people around the table to come up with solutions, come up with ideas. Now, if those individuals around you look like you, come from the same background as you, come from the same educational path as you, some come from the same grandparenting and parenting as you, your outcomes, your thoughts, your solutions will all be similar. Diversity of thought for me is if you have those individuals that don't look like you, come from different concepts, come from different backgrounds, come from different cultures, my gosh, those solutions will be different. Yes, it'll be challenging because you're trying to relate to something that doesn't, quite not with the same cut as you are. But hopefully the solutions would be much more sustainable. And this is where I hope, for example, when we were the leading bank in the UK, but we were at the bottom of the pecking order as far as the Asian markets was concerned because we didn't understand them. We didn't have the products. We didn't know how to communicate to them. Why did it have to take somebody like Kamel, who came from the community, to actually shape the company up and saying, you know what, I think you're missing a trick here. This is what people are saying about us. We haven't got the culture. We don't understand them. We haven't got the products. Because I came from the community, I was listening to the community, I was able to add that voice around that table. And thankfully they listened. And within 4 years, we became leaders in the market. That is diversity of thought. It's how do we have the courage as leaders, as CEOs, as chairmen, to constantly challenge who those individuals sitting around that table are, not just a table, all the way around to your products teams, to your marketing team, to the middle management, challenging what their makeup looks like so that we can have that diversity, we can stay ahead of the game, because those are people who are going to bring that different thinking around that table. And we have to then also then start thinking where that pool comes from and be courageous enough not constantly think it's all about CVs and it's all about education. I didn't go to university. I didn't go to college. I had 3 heroes in my banking world who had the courage to influence me to step over. I'm proud to say that I paid the bank 10 times, hopefully much more richer than I would have done if those people weren't there. So we do need allies. We need allyship of people understanding us and looking through that lens in a different way. And that for me is leadership.
So this is, I mean, it just continues to get more and more surreal as we go through the interview, because like you said, I am aware that you have an honorary doctorate, of course, and you say you didn't go to college, but you've managed to start from the very bottom in a very challenging industry and managed to bridge the gap between Asia and high finance. Now, I don't know if, any type of research or rational analysis, could come up with a case like yours, because it really is an interesting phenomenon and just mind-boggling. And so I would like to then say, as these different economies around the world try to develop and try to share in the prosperity of the fourth industrial revolution, we segue into the fourth question, which is, how can developing nations and minority leaders develop resilient education systems? Because then it begs the question, what is education? Because it seems to me, I mean, you come from a background where some really, really strong seeds were sown at a very young age. And, perhaps there was something in the environment for you growing up that you were exposed to that, just allowed you to see beyond systems and just tap into some fundamentals of life and how social systems work. So redefining the future of education and creating opportunity for people who don't have opportunities right now. How can we develop resilient education systems?
Tia, there's one education that everyone has, and I think it's overlooked. It's life. Each one of us has a story. Each one of us goes through life and we have curveballs constantly thrown at us, some big, some small. So when I talk about, my career, that peppered history, yes, I was born in India. My parents survived the partition of India and Pakistan. We lost everything. He was a civil engineer, my father. And then when Britain, reached out to the Commonwealth, come to Britain, help build Britain, we came here. But instead of, using his skills, there was racism. My parents and my brothers were Sikhs. We had to cut, they cut their hair, they removed their turbans in order to integrate, so not to be bullied. My father became he had a huge chip on his shoulder. And basically at a very young age when he did this, and, he said, look, keep your head down, don't rock the boat, nobody's going to give you a chance. So when you talk about, was there foresight? Was there something that we learned? But actually now I'm saying to everybody, show your vulnerability, be your strength. But I had the opposite lesson at a very young age. And the other lesson I had was my mother was sitting there crying and she wasn't challenging her husband and saying, where have you brought us? And the lesson was, as a woman in my community, I realized I didn't have a voice. I ended up going in as a cashier in the bank because my brother challenged my father and said, look, she's got some decent O levels from school. Okay, you're not going to let her to go to college, because dad just felt there was no point. Ended up as a cashier, and 18 months later, they were arranging a marriage for me. So I had an arranged marriage at the age of 19, met my husband on my wedding night in a very strict household where none of the women worked. So balancing this one side of my life with this very male-dominated industry and challenging challenging home, I would say, which was a very strict household, very hierarchical, where you're suppressed, your voice. You don't have a voice. I had children. I had no say of my children. But I think what drove me at work was that opportunity that actually I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make an environment where you counted, where I counted, where my voice counted. And I couldn't see the microaggressions. I couldn't see the bullying at school. I couldn't see that they were being racist to me. All I could see that I wanted to make things better. And that turned into curiosity, and that became my DNA and my brand. And slowly from there, even to this day, I would say the microaggressions I faced, I didn't even notice them, to be honest. I was just chipping away on wanting to enjoy the thing in front of me, an opportunity to improve something. So my message out to your listeners to be, we all have challenges. You might be in environments and geographies where life is difficult. Survival, you're just surviving day to day. And I can't imagine what that feels like. I'm so humbled and grateful that, yes, I'm in the UK now. We have opportunities here. We have a voice, we can say. Yes, there's still racism. Yes, it's still being difficult here. I'm not saying it's easy, especially with Black Lives Matter. It's unsurfaced loads of stuff. But overall, we're in a safe environment. You might not be, but that's what's your backbone. That's your story. You can make it. Every individual can pick up that resilience. It's your story. It's your life journey, which is your education. It's those curveballs not to let you down. My father, one thing I learned, we have no option to succeed was his message. We come here, we have to be successful. That's what we did. Just chipping away, moving on, making it better. Better for yourself, for your children, and the future. So whatever struggles you're facing, think of them as an opportunity. Learn from them. They are your backbone. They're your tools in your backpack that you carry around with you, and they will make you stronger as you step forward. Hope that helps.
Wow. It doesn't just help, it liberates. Because I personally can relate to a lot of that in so many levels. So thank you for sharing, the in-depth perspective there. But I also must say, given the adversity that, you faced, again, on so many different levels, the challenges that you faced, but you were somehow just innately convinced that you will find a solution. And perhaps it speaks to the nature of leadership. Some leaders are nurtured and some, are just natural. And I always say to people, no one should be forced to do anything that doesn't, resonate with them. And I would just like to also add that, not everyone is a leader in the technical sense, but everyone is a leader in stewarding their own narrative. And even though you weren't a leader as a child, I mean, you were far down on the food chain or the pecking order, right? Being a female, being from India, being of a minority religion. I mean, the list goes on. But you took the responsibility to lead your own life and your small little circle of responsibility, whether it was, maybe around your friends or around your very, very minor position at the bank, but you still assume the position of a leader. And that to me is just really fascinating. The next question is, how can concerned members of privileged races contribute to the fight against structural racism? Now, I'm just going to expand on this because I think this is one of the most important topics of our time. We know for sure that children aren't born racist. And I've come up with this concept. I'm not sure if it's a case of multiple discovery and if someone's come with this concept already, but analyzing the tides of change. What's difficult is that we have cycles within cycles. And so it's not, just you timing one cycle, and reigning supreme over that challenge, but you're going through different cycles at the same time. And that's what makes life dynamic. So when people are from, very privileged backgrounds, and we know for sure that children aren't born racist or born as supremists of any form or shape, how do we help these people break free from the chains of what I call institutional momentum? Because, when you're born into a system and you don't like it, it's an unjust system, it's not fair, it's not sustainable. But then for your own livelihood and some of your own aspirations, you still need to make money, you still need to be in certain social circles. There's people you love in those social circles and care for deeply. So it's not really easy for you to break out of the institution. And so you suffer from this cognitive dissonance that's caused by, the institutional momentum that's slowly eating away at your time. So how can those people contribute to the fight against structural racism?
I think if I just step back, you're right. No child is born racist. It's the fabric of the nurturing that you're born into. And the word privilege is an interesting word because majority of the time it's associated with the white, rich. However, even though I've told you my story, I feel I'm privileged because I feel now I'm in this environment. I'm living in this geography of the part of the world where, when you look around where there's wars, there's challenges around the globe, I feel privileged that I'm here now, no matter what journey that's brought me here, looking back. So I think the word privilege can be carved in all sorts of ways. But whatever path that you're dealt with, whether you're in a privileged situation or you're not, or you're in an institution that you feel that is governed by those people that you think are privileged, we all have a role to play. We all have an opportunity to be mindful of our responsibility. And for me, I've created an anagram called SPACE. First of all, S for, self. Do you really know yourself? Do you look in the mirror and ask yourself, I know what makes me tick. I know what my trigger points are, both for my mental health and when I get angry. I know how I react. I know how I behave. And for P is for purpose. What is your purpose? What is this all about? Do we just automatically get on the bandwagon? It's about making money. It's about parents, pushing their children to get an education. But what's the purpose? What is your purpose here? I know we're saying we're looking forward, but actually, yes, for me, there is that bit about me. I want to be able to look back and say, there's my legacy. I came and I did better. I was able to be proud of what I left behind, not just for me, but for my future generation. So what is your purpose? And I think so rather than getting on the bandwagon, whatever it is you're doing, constantly pressing that pause button to find your purpose and then trying to be authentic. Being yourself, I think, is the hardest thing one can do. I wasn't myself for decades at work. I hid my mask over the person I was at home. I was going through mental challenges at home. I nearly went through I did try to commit suicide when I just couldn't handle it. And then my 7-year-old son came and I found my purpose at that moment in time, realized the shame of what I was about to do. So finding your purpose, being your authentic self. I know who I am now. I'm not a natural leader. I don't like to be in the limelight, but I know what I want to do. I want to make a difference. And whatever I touch, I want to make a difference. And then so it's those sort of things for me is actually really understanding yourself. Stop pointing fingers at others, no matter what privilege. We all have moments of privilege in our life, whatever they might be. Is taking advantage of that, standing up, finding the courage, looking in your backpack and looking at all of the things that you've covered, that you want to make it better for others. When you have a purpose, so for me, that's why volunteering is so key, because you go and volunteer for somebody to save somebody's life, to change somebody's life that you don't normally do in your day-to-day life, in your work, in my banking environment, when I go home, when I've mentored somebody who's coming from a completely different background to me, to know that actually my words mattered, that in some way, in some small way, that person is now a better place than they were before. That halo effect, I measured my colleagues. They were coming back much more agile thinking, much more creative thinking, much more loyal to the brand and thankful to the company to allow them to go and volunteer in the first place. How can we all volunteer to make life better for others? Because trust me, it'll make you a better person. It'll make life much more enjoyable, make it more meaningful what we're trying to do, rather than just being on this roller coaster of me, ego and achievement, and look at me, how wonderful I am. When you do things for others, there is nothing that can replace that in any monetary matter at all for me.
Well, another bombshell. Again, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your story. Now, more to the technical jargon and systems of governance and corporations. What can ESG, and for listeners who may not be aware, that's environmental, social, and governance. How can ESG and the UN Sustainable Development Goals in investment mandates, which are typically called impact investments, how can impact investments accelerate diversity on executive boards of multinational corporations and financial institutions?
Yeah, that's so it goes back to when I was doing that role in the group corporate affairs and looking at creative ways to churn. We were a bank that, gosh, we're nearly going bankrupt. To build trust and pride with customers, we had to really start again. And I'm proud to say that actually, when I looked at our social investments, the stuff that as any multi-global company does as part of their CSR programs, their responsible business programs, or their diversity programs, they just think, oh, well, we have to do that because we need to be seen to be doing it. But actually, it became part of the strategic conversation. This is not just a nice to do. This makes business sense. When you have diversity of thought, when you look at diversity in a different way, and you look at inclusion as a tool that will actually increase your bottom line, when you look at investments in climate or responsibility of products or what you're developing, when you look at colleagues and the retention of talent in a totally different way, then it matters. That's when I think, when we look at these sustainable goals and UN goals, all of these things were, to be honest, in the past, were just tick boxes for me. Corporates will think, yeah, we need to do that. Look at what can we do? Okay, we look at our plastic. We look at this purely as a tick box. It's when it becomes part of your DNA, when it becomes part of your company's thinking and your philosophy, but more importantly, your purpose in everything you do, from your product design, your talent development, your future, the way you talk, the way that you communicate. When it becomes part of your DNA, that's when I think it's really going to shift. And this then is going to be much more interweaving rather than something that we have to do. It is the way that we work. Profit is no longer just about shareholder value. It's much more than that. To be sustainable, look at how many brands have gone under through the COVID. How many people haven't survived through COVID? Why? Because they weren't agile enough. They weren't listening to their customers. They weren't opening their eyes to what's happening around them for decades. Leaders were too egoistic about their own pay packet. They were too busy trying to appease the shareholders rather than looking what's happening to the customers, what's happening to the climate, what's happening to the people around them. How do they need to stay agile and forward thinking? It's those companies that will survive. And that is embracing some of what UN is trying to achieve.
Wow.
Rather than it being a sideline.
Wow. So that, you talk about the corporate DNA, and it just sort of put a light bulb into my mind because, again, I think what Steve Jobs also once said, that design is not how it looks, but how it works. And when you talk about, bringing this heightened sense of responsibility as part of your business and how you move, and not just something you have to tick off for compliance, it just changes the whole game. It just changes the whole game altogether. And I'm sure people can agree with you now, but in the past it was difficult to imagine. And there's two quotients that also come to mind. Previously, we had the emotional intelligence quotient, which is the EQ, right? Where we try to figure out, okay, well, are these people empathetic? Can they see certain points of perspective? Even from groups that may not be, from the same group, or just alien groups. So you mentioned agility, and people and corporations who survived COVID being entities that are much more agile. And again, that brings in the conversation of the agility quotient, which is really about not just empathy, but empathy in motion, to really try and, be in tune with your emotions, which is a very heavy exercise, being in touch with yourself, but still being able to move to the heartbeat of the world, which is a very chaotic place. So being in tune with yourself, but also being dynamic and very detached and very cold and systematic, that's agility, because it's empathy in motion. And that's something that I think you've been able to demonstrate, across the board in your life. Again, not a very easy thing to do. You've had big lows, but you've had huge highs as well. It's just complex stuff. But yes,
I do believe it's complex, but Her Majesty the Queen, we have a quote on our Queen's Commonwealth Trust Fund on the website that, and I think it's so beautiful and so appropriate, that individually, you can't stop wars. You feel you can't change the world and look at all the woes of the world, but tiny little actions, individual actions, have a ripple effect. Then the collective of the masses is what will make the difference. So for me, my little ripple effect, if I can help a leader at a multinational CEO go and look in the mirror and ask their questions, do you know your people? Do you know what makes them tick? Can you come up on stage and show your vulnerability and say, actually, guys, I don't have the answer, or this is how anxious I am feeling. I'm worried about this. I did that with, when Lloyd's, we went under, we had a new board appointed and a new CEO came from Santander. Within a little while, he was signed up with stress, and we really thought we were going to go bankrupt. But he came back, we managed to turn the company around. And 6 years later, when I took on Mental Health UK as one of our charity partnerships, I spoke to him and said, if you now don't tell your story, you'll be just another CEO signing off another charity partnership. He did an interview in the FT and explained that, he was going home every night anxious about how he was going to turn the ship around, and that anxiety was causing sleep deprivation, and sleep deprivation caused the stress, and he was, signed off into the Priory. That interview had such a ripple effect across CEOs around the world of, oh my God, this guy's, he's owned up. But more importantly, internally, 85,000 colleagues thought, my gosh, our CEO's got a heart, he's human. That had a biggest ripple effect in our company, because it allows the execs to say, we can, if the boss can share his anxiety, so can we. But all for some, when you have a purpose, when you believe in your leadership, and you believe in a united purpose, The people will work and go the extra mile for you. I call it, they will walk over coals for you. That's what I felt my team would do for me, because they knew I would walk over coals for them. How do you create that type of leadership? And that's where I think it stems from the bottom up. Be truthful, look in the mirror and ask yourself what's stopping you. And from the top down, be truthful, be vulnerable, be authentic. You don't have all the answers, and you need to, but just be honest.
Oof, oh man, I mean, I cannot tell you how attractive and how compelling it is to lead by example. I mean, one of the things that just fascinates me all the time is some parents who come from absolute nothing, but have children who are so phenomenal and just keep rising and rising to greater heights. Some of the most phenomenal people I know come from zero. But when you look at what they can achieve in a lifetime, it's unbelievable. And I think that comes from when a parent doesn't try to be Superman. When you tell your kids, look, I can't do this. I don't have the brains to do this. But if you can, here's what we can try and do. Coach me along the way. And it's such a tragedy when you love the people you're serving, but you just cannot be vulnerable to them. It just takes both of you down, and it's just a never-ending spiral.
So, it's because in the past we've always had this image of what a CEO and a chairman looks like, this image of a strong person in this male suit, but that's not the future of leadership. And when we talk about allyship, when you talk about those people, when you said your parents, my parents weren't educated apart from dad, but here he couldn't help me. My father-in-law, who became my ally in my home, who helped me survive, couldn't read and write. But to this day, I'm so grateful for that man to help me navigate my politics at home, gave me the encouragement to go out to work and continue going out to work and be able to balance these two worlds. This was an uneducated man, couldn't read and write. Out of all of the people, the mentors I've had for this day, I'm always grateful to him. So don't be blinded and don't be dazzled by the diamonds that you think are the people that are going to help you. There might be somebody just sitting on your doorstep who'd be the biggest person that'd be able to help you get over that hurdle.
If we stopped right here, I mean, that would be it. I'm actually considering selling this podcast now. So second to last question is, to what extent can data and machine learning educate us on the root causes and solutions to polarity on executive boards? So now, how are we, now that we're talking about diversity of thought mainly, how do you think data and some of these new machine learning algorithms can be used to create, that diversity in executive boards? Because like you said, there's this DNA that we're aspiring for, but what key variables, or themes do you think need more focus and research in order to achieve the diversity that we're trying to achieve on these different boards?
So first of all, we know what gets measured gets done. So number one is having correct HR data. Is you need to understand what your profile of your audience and your colleagues look like. And even now in the UK, some companies are struggling and just trying to get their ethnic data. So that's basic number one. You need to have an understanding of what the makeup of your company is, so you know what your challenge is and where you need to improve and what the attrition rates are in certain categories and age and so forth. So it needs to be cut in all sorts of layers, not just one dimensional. But then also what I would say when we go up the line and you're looking at your scorecards and you're looking at what is success, in the past it was very much driven by, what you've delivered far as real hard facts. But actually now I think emotional intelligence, as Harvard said, is a key differentiator of leadership. Stanford even said, 80% of their CEOs said empathy was a key driver to success. So how do we measure these measurements? How do we measure the soft stuff in leadership that we can define in our scorecards? So I think every company needs to now review the way that we measure our people, to be able to identify those leaders in much more different dynamics and what makes them tick, what brings their skill sets. Is not just I'm a good salesperson and I've delivered on my targets. Those are people I think are very short-lived. Those leaders are very egoistic because they only look out for themselves. So we need to look at actually how do we measure people going forward. That would be the true leaders of our future.
I couldn't agree more. Now, going to the last question, which is really, the magnum opus of this whole exercise, is wrapping it up and bringing it all together. What elements of smart cities should local governments focus on to allow for happier and more fulfilling cities?
You know what, I would say keep it simple. I'm not, humbly, as I said, I'm not an academic. I don't have any, big smart solutions for you. Keeping it simple to really understand the profile of your city. And if that city is diverse, then you need to ensure all of your foundations are supporting their ambitions, that you speak the language in their languages. And what I mean, not language, I'm not just being, metaphor here, but it's really understanding what drives the community. What is that the community looking for? Having the simple setup, the social setup, encouraging and empowering people so that they feel as though, you know what, there's nothing stopping me and it's fair. I've got the opportunity to be able to work. I've got the opportunity to have my voice heard. I've got the opportunity, no matter what background I'm coming from, if I can actually get up and move forward, I can do it. So for smart cities, I think is understanding those dynamics in your makeup of those cities, helping those individuals from the ground up to feel part of the city, because they are your future. They're the ones that will make a difference. They're the ones that will take advantage and be entrepreneurs of the future. So how do we nurture them? How do we provide them the background and that feeling of belonging, that this is their city? They have a stake. They need to invest in it. And the more they invest, everyone will prosper. Does that help?
Well, it does more than help. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I think all of the people whom we revere and remember today are leaders who kept it simple. And even if, you were to talk to someone who does something that's very complicated, like building mechanical watches, they'll tell you it takes thousands of pieces just to replicate the movement of the human heart, and to create a functional system, from a tourbillon, which is the heart spring of the watch, right through to the hand of the clock that moves in seconds or minutes. And that's a complicated thing to do. And, at the end of the day, that complexity has to serve the simple being, which is a human being. So first of all, we need to be simple. And complexity is just secondary, because human beings are simple at the core. And so for that very phenomenal, very amazing interview, I'd like to say thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you, Dr. Kamel Hothi. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good luck.